Welcome to the Life Leadership Podcast with myself, Leila Singh, all things coaching, career, and personal branding. This podcast is for ambitious career professionals like you, wanting to create a life of choice and freedom, to be, do, and have more through overcoming limitations, to develop new perspectives and insights, and to redefine your success, be that in work, health, relationships, and so much more. In today's episode of the Life Leadership Podcast, I'm speaking with Ramita Anand. Ramita is a mother of two, a teacher, entrepreneur, podcast host, and author. Born and raised in Vancouver, Canada, she spent her first few years of teaching as part of a bigger adventure by moving to London and working in inner city schools. With over 15 years of classroom-based teaching experience, including 5 in learning support departments in diverse schools, her aim is always to work from a child-led approach. Ramita engages with her pupils from a unique perspective on the multitude of pressures that pupils face at school, at home, and amongst peers. She's founded Elevate.RA, a platform to support young adolescent girls through an 8-week mentorship program where young girls can thrive by developing the key attributes of confidence, resilience, empathy, emotional intelligence, and the often underestimated attribute of kindness. Her mission has been to create a learning framework and methodology that will guide preteen and teen girls to foster their superpowers by using techniques that she has used in her classrooms, in one-on-one teaching, and in her role as a parent. In today's episode, Ramita shares with us how we can help to alleviate girls' fear of STEM and instead have them embrace a love of STEM, why having more role models is important and how to access them, how encouraging girls to realize the benefits of STEM subjects and its diverse reach across industries creates such positive impact, why we want to invite girls to ask themselves how they can go about being the change they want to see, and that whilst it's so easy for girls to cap their own growth, it's down to us to show them what is possible. So let's head over and hear what Ramita has to say. Ramita, hi there, and welcome to the Life Leadership Podcast. It's great to have you here. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing brilliant. Thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be talking to you.
Likewise, because I'm really excited for this conversation because it's very different to often some of the ones that I have with others, and this is more also going to teach me a lot about this area. So let's just get started. We're talking about girls and STEM and education and opening their world up to what's possible. So tell me about the fear around STEM that you experience girls have had or are having.
Sure. So I can speak to this probably on a couple of through a different lens of both being in school as a teacher and also then being a mother of a teen girl. So I feel that the similarities are there. I think perceptions of who does what as a job, even though we're in 2023, somehow has transcended time. Like we genuinely have got an issue with children thinking that there are jobs for boys and jobs for girls. And I mean, it was only a generation ago that girls were given crayons and boys were given trucks, or whatever the way it was when you sit down in a nursery or playground setting or playgroup setting. And I know we've come so far from those, gender stereotypes, but I think gender bias is still a massive issue. And I think girls have somehow allowed themselves to believe that they are going to be less than or not as good as their counterparts in subjects that are in the STEM field.
And where do you think that's coming from?
Well, it can be from parental views, like genuinely from some cultural backgrounds. A lot of girls are still asked to pursue more subjects that are suited for a homely career afterwards, if they're allowed to have higher education at all. Then there is, so there's that, definitely. There's huge, and I know the media gets so much blame, but media is a problem. If you look at all the science fiction films or the action-packed films, where anything that's happening that is really cool and actiony, and now, yes, we've got wonderful role models that are action figures and people that are doing roles. But if we look at traditional media or traditional films, and certainly when I was growing up, the people in lead roles that were doing engineering or technology type roles or jobs were all featured as men. And I don't think we can hide from that. That has come a long way, and it is coming, even more. But I don't think that there are views that have been subconsciously sort of built up in our brains, and then our children's brains. It's through osmosis that they start to assume that a man is going to be behind the controller or the cockpit, or the, whether it's a pilot, or often, we comment when we see a female pilot. It's like a really cool thing. Why are we commenting on that? But because it was been so unusual for us to see these types of roles being filled with females.
Yeah, no, definitely. Even I saw a post recently on LinkedIn about that, where someone was calling it out and saying, you're an entrepreneur. Why do you have to say you're a female entrepreneur, or a female this, female that? It's just like you're what you're doing, whether it's a pilot or an entrepreneur or a tech something. So it's interesting.
Completely, it's true, isn't it? We have come away from saying fireman, we say fire person or whatever it is, but still I think there is something really interesting, especially for the generation above us. Like my dad will definitely say, oh my gosh, look, the firefighter's a woman. It's really like unusual. And I think especially when you come from maybe Indian background like I do, where the homemakers are females and the breadwinners are males. So whatever the job is, you aren't out of the house. And if you're out of the house, you're doing what was considered a female type role, which is, being a teacher or working in an office and coming home at a good time so you could make dinner for the children. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I mean, how much are you seeing that evolve now? Is that shift occurring at all or enough?
I haven't been in classrooms myself as a traditional teacher for a while, but definitely, if I'm honest with you, the most schools have clubs outside of school time. So everyone takes IT and takes, the traditional DT classes, and because it's part of the curriculum. But if you look at the number of children that voluntarily sign up for STEM classes or science club, or voluntarily take up Minecrafting or gaming or coding classes, the balance is still very, very shifted. There are way more boys in those clubs than there are girls. So I want to believe that we are shifting things and changing things, and role models, we'll talk about that I'm sure later, but are having a positive impact on girls wanting to be curious about what they can do in this field. But I think there is still a like you said, there's a fear around it. And I think we have also, and I've discussed this at length with other people, but we've also sort of assumed that you're either a left brain, right brain type of child. And if you are, then you do binary work very well. And perhaps the more open lateral thinking types of subjects like English and history and those types of debating clubs are left to girls. Which, I don't know if there is that much merit to it, if I'm honest with you. I think we can get creative, and we can get very, very lateral thinking, and we can have really great, wonderful collaboration in classrooms and in clubs and in these types of places if we allow children to have that dialogue with each other and we encourage it.
Yeah, and I think that's important. And just listening to what you said there, actually, because it just took me back to, say, when I was at school and I was really, really creative, and I was into doing all that, whether it was sewing, drawing, graphic design, textile design, everything. And I loved it, and I get straight A's, effortless, and I love doing it, right? And then, between my teacher, my parents, got encouraged to go do accountancy, and, I did it. I was successful in it. But actually, now, over the last few years, I'm starting to recognize that I've kind of almost suppressed my creative side. And to your point, I think, some people are a little bit more left or right brain, yes, but I think you can have both. And
it doesn't mean that they're left brain. And I'm also thinking about a couple of children that I know from what you've just said there. One who's very, very left brain, and one who's much more the creative, but actually it's the creative who's the techie.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
See, and that, that's fabulous. Isn't that wonderful? And I think we shouldn't be so binary about our thinking about the way our child is or isn't, or I don't know. And also I think we start to label what you're good at and what you're not good at. So that creates that what I talk about in my Elevate program around fixed mindset, that I can only do subjects that are catered to my strengths because my strengths are X, Y, Z, which is true. Obviously, you should pursue what you're good at and what you're naturally gifted at, of course. But what does growth mindset teach us? What is it? What do we really want our girls to and our boys to understand is that you can push yourself beyond what you think or what kind of framework you think you belong in, but actually try something. And this idea around which I think a lot of schools are embracing is cross-curricular ideas. So how can you bring art and tech together? How can you bring history and engineering? Because there's so much of that ties in, and it can be it doesn't need to be so disjointed, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, exactly. And again, playing on your strengths, yes, but actually I think that runs the risk of people missing out on doing things that maybe they're not good at right now, but when they nail it, they can excel in it. And that can be from anything, from sports or tech or art and creative.
I know. And I mean, I don't know if you've seen it for your listeners that are not in London at the moment, but the Abel Voyage, I don't know if you've heard anything.
Yeah, I've heard of, I've seen it. It's running in London.
Yeah, it's amazing. So we went to it this weekend, and if you are a lover of music and you're a lover of dance or costume design or fashion, you may not think that the tech world is for you, but the whole way that this concert or this production was created, with the creative power and the lights and the CGI or whatever it was, I don't even know the name of the technology they used, the holograms, in order to bring that production to us, is absolutely breathtaking and mind-boggling at the same time. I have to say, I was so confused by the whole thing, but it really did resonate with the idea that you don't have to think that because I love fashion, I can't love STEM, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing as well, I mean, I've worked in tech, but I'm not a techie. And the interesting with tech, it is now, today, it influences everything in the world that we're involved in, that we consume, that we go to, whether it's retail, food, there's a company, which was I think it was Deliveroo, at a tech conference, and I got talking to someone there, and I just sort of laughed. I was like, oh, I saw Deliveroo, and I'm thinking, oh, food, and then they said, yeah, that's what everyone's saying, but actually we're a tech company. I was like, oh, yeah, actually, yeah, you are.
Yeah.
But you don't realize every single thing we're doing and interacting with at the moment is influenced in a huge way by tech.
Yeah, it's so true. So I had that conversation a couple of years ago with somebody when I asked her what her views on fintech were, she said, I think it's going to be everything tech. Watch this space. It's not going to be ed tech or fintech. It's going to be everything tech. The world is moving towards technology in every industry and every enterprise that we look at. So I mean, it is fascinating to see how quickly the world is changing with technology.
Yeah, completely. So tell me a bit about role models then. I mean, how can girls identify with role models? Where can they find them? How can we do more to help them?
Yeah, it's true, right? Because I think our girls are very much stuck at the moment, or at least a lot of young girls, I won't say all of them, I won't generalize, but many of them are getting a lot of their influencing through what we call influencers on social media. And so, again, social media can get a bad rap. And I don't mean to slag it down, but I think it is really important as parents, and particularly parents at this stage with social media, because I think teachers don't really have a lot of control on that side of it. But I do think watching and helping them curate a list of people they follow on their accounts is really important, and making sure you've got the diversity and you've got the right, because they are out there. I don't think there's a lack of good role models, but it's just knowing them and making sure, because this horrible thing that controls your kind of senses and all the sense of the algorithms, which is, you know, I hate the idea of falling privy to something that thinks they know your brain, or they know your style or shopping patterns or who you follow patterns. So because they will then just feed you the same stuff. So if you as a parent are, because kids are vulnerable and they're impressionable, they don't always understand this, but we do. So if we take the time every few weeks to sort of just sit down and say, hey, let's look at who you've been watching or what YouTube videos you've been looking at. I think that's really important, and take the time to find these amazing role models. You know, I was watching Geetanjali Rao the other day speak at a UN delegation, and, you know, she said, oh, you know, for my whole life, and then she went, my whole life, I'm 17. And I'm like, yeah, she's 17. And she's been, you know, cracking codes and finding ways of cleaning water for countries that are struggling to get clean water. So she was 15. And she's, you know, and if we could get our girls to be inspired by such role models instead of not instead of, but in addition to whoever else they might be liking or whatever else they might be following, I think it would be just a really nice way to market or drop it into conversation at dinner and say, oh, goodness me, look at what I just read about, where the first woman in space, the second woman in space, or the third person to fly a rocket. Now we have lots of examples. It used to be just one. I think things, not just in STEM, but it's happening in sport. You know, now the conversation around what the lionesses are doing is just wonderful. So to get people that, and girls that are doing things in fields that could inspire your daughters to want to perhaps at least ask questions about it. Like, how did she get into that field? Or what did she do to get herself interested in this? Because you just don't know until you try. And that's the main message. And then I think, so that's something we can be doing at home. And also just then, you know, when we do pick movies or we do watch, I don't know, Top Gun, Maverick, whatever it is, and all the pilots are male, and because at that time they probably were, but you know, it's great to then maybe counterbalance that and maybe show a film about an amazing pilot that or documentary or a book about a woman that has done something similar in history, which is always worth mentioning or celebrating. And I think the same thing happens at school. I think we must remember to update our textbooks, update our video content that we use, the way we do assemblies, who's leading them, who are external guests, you know, and not just female. I think the other problem with that is making sure the diversity in race is also important. You know, we don't want to make it feel like if you come from X country, then you clearly aren't going to be an engineer, or if you are from X country, then you must be a scientist. I think that can also play into some of our unconscious biases. And I think if we are to move the conversation forward, it's good to do a proper overhaul of all of these kind of stereotypes that we may unconsciously hold.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing there is that it kind of starts in the home and with parents.
So. I do. That puts a lot of pressure on parents. I feel like we always make parents feel guilty, but it is role modeling, right? And if you've got a love for something, or if you've got a job in finance, and I think that the other sort of the double-edged sword of that, and if I can play devil's advocate, is a lot of females that may have started off in these subjects may have had to give up their jobs to be mothers because of the problem that they've suffered to not be able to stay in these jobs. Right. Because they haven't been fostered or cared for or nurtured in a way that allows them the flexibility to have the job and career of their dreams, but also be able to be flexible with their family care. So I think if you listen to people like Indra Nooyi, who I love, I think she's amazing. She will say that the only reason she was at the level she was at Pepsi was because she sacrificed being at home with her children. So a lot of women don't want to do that. And I think if we make it fairer, so role modeling begins at home. Yes. So if you are a woman and you're a mother that had this amazing career in science or in engineering, but you couldn't keep with it because you became a mom, then what messages are we sending to our children?
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And I guess so if we're saying it kind of starts at home with parents, with the environment, would you say there's still a lot more that schools could do as well, teachers could do, or the government even could do to support this?
Yeah, and I think there are more initiatives out there. I think I just saw a group of girls who were at 10 Downing Street for International Women's Day this week doing some coding things, which is amazing. And I love seeing the photos of them all in there, which is a lovely thing to see. I think we have got lots and lots of Reshma Sanjani, who started Girls Who Code, all that wonderful initiative that's coming out there to make it extra cool to be somebody who is in these subjects is important. But then giving girls the space to explore, and boys. I don't think it should be girl or boy, but I think, yes, schools should be taking part in more of these competitions or conferences, and not to be winners. And that's the other big thing that I have an issue with is, when you do a play or you have a sports thing, there can only really be one captain and there can only be one real lead. So somehow girls and boys from school age get this idea that life is a competition and I've got to win it for myself. But the thing that's amazing with STEM subjects is if you've got a problem, an issue that you're trying to resolve, actually the more brains that are in there and the more collaboration we have and the more children that get involved, the greater your chances of doing well at this. So those types of Olympics and science weeks, and again, I hate that we have one science week a year in school, but it's important that we genuinely find ways to let children realize, girls and boys, that you've got something to offer. You've got a great idea. Let's see how we can explore that and what we can do to get more curious about it and dig into it and get teachers to really open that kind of conversation where you're not just looking for the right answer. That's the issue I find, that when you do get girls in a classroom that's problem solving like that, they just want to get to the answer because they're so used to being right, or they want to get to a place where they get their full marks. And I keep saying that there is no right or wrong answer. You come up with the answer. That's the beauty of it. And 90% of science or research became anything to successfully attribute to the research was when they made 1,000 mistakes and had a lot of experiments go wrong. So that's why this is really good for you. I feel for younger people to use the opportunities in school to go and do experiments and find ways that you can mess things up, because every time you mess it up, you realize what you can rule out and how you might get to the solution in a different way, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And, the whole point there around the focus on you've got to win and there's a right or wrong and it's black and white. And, you've got, if you're not up there at the top, then you fail. But actually, it's nothing about failing. It's about, okay, well, that didn't work. Let's try again. What have you learned from that? How can I go do something differently? It's like a baby learning to walk. They don't just give up, right? They keep going and they figure it out. And as they grow, they figure things out, right? So why is it that as we get older, it's frowned upon and that, well, you should either just get it right first time or you're a failure? And it's interesting why when you're a baby, it's acceptable, it's good, we encourage. And then as we're getting older, there's this whole meaning behind, well, if you're not picked for the team in the sport, on the PE, right, then you're kind of left behind and that makes you a failure. But you're not. No. And I think there's something to be said for that as well.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. There's so many areas of this, around resilience that I think is important. Obviously, learning not to be successful every time or get things 1,000% correct is hugely important for our kids, because life isn't going to be 100% accurate or right in any way, as we all know. And I think making sure, and that's what I think the beauty of STEM subjects is, and I don't know if we appreciate that fully, because you're not really sure what you're trying to get to when you first start out. You might have a hypothesis, but the idea is to work out whether or not your thought process or your ingredients or your idea around that is actually going to do anything or not. And if it doesn't do anything, great, you get to go back and do it again. And I think that is such a lovely way to bring that message around. If you fail once, fall once, get up twice, or whatever. So fall 7, get up 8. You're not going to stop. I hope not, because you become so invested in your hypotheses, or you get so invested in your idea. And when you start to see small increments of success, I think that's what hopefully gives children the idea that, okay, we got this much closer when we did it this way. How about if we change things this way? But again, that only happens when we encourage dialogue and exchange and collaboration and different viewpoints from different angles. And I think the idea that we are having, you know, this conversation because the world is 50% female at least, and all the jobs are not being fairly distributed. And what we're doing is we're getting policies, or we're getting careers that are made with half the population not considered.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is obviously the main thing for educators to think about, is we're really not serving our children fairly if we aren't letting them see how important their opinion is. And I think maybe kids don't realize that their voice matters as much as we should give it value, maybe.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for that. So taking us into a bit more into education then, how can we do more to have girls realize the benefits of working in STEM as a longer term goal, and following the STEM subjects a bit more? What can we do to encourage them?
So it's funny, isn't it? I think, I don't know if you remember this, but ever since I was a little girl, one of the things I was asked by grown-ups and family relatives that come to visit and come up over is, oh, hello, and you know, how do you like school? And yes, I love school, or I don't love school. And what do you want to be? I mean, from a tiny tot, right? You're asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I thought it was hilarious. My daughter, until the age of 6 or 7, used to tell people she wanted to be the tooth fairy, which I was, you know, completely loved. Whereas my father sort of looked at me and said, what do you do? What do you mean she wants to be a tooth fairy? You know, like, I know, Dad, you wanted us to choose lawyer and doctor, and you know, but there are other dreams, and let her have her kind of thing. Which, so again, I just think it's interesting kind of change in conversation and understanding of how children can evolve, and what we almost instill in them without them realizing from such a young age. And so I think by the time they get to school, by the time they're handed over to teachers, they've already got these ingrained ideas in their minds about where their life is supposed to go, or how it's supposed to look. And I've spent quite a few years last year moving back to London, but I spent it in Singapore, where I met a lot of Chinese and Asian families. And it seems to be something, you know what you should be doing, whether it's taking over your dad's company, or your, again, dad's company usually, or you're going to go to follow a career that is a real career, not a lot of careers in creative industries are considered hobbies by many Asian parents. I don't think I'm being too outlandish in saying that. Would you agree? I think it's a pretty
I wanted to be a graphic designer, and my dad was like, no, that's not the way to go.
Isn't that interesting? So I think that, again, that's changing, and I don't know if it's there yet. So how can we change that? And I think one of the things is to really make sure that kids are speaking. We had a conversation about this at my daughter's school about when they're choosing their A levels and their GCSEs, which is where my kids are at, about making sure that the subjects they choose are their choices, not our choices. And I think we are very guilty to kind of give our opinions, or let them, even not even realizing we're doing what we're doing, but we pass on our own expectations to our children. So I think that's one thing to be careful of. But also I think one way to get girls interested is once they figure out what their passions are and what they love, and genuinely let them do those things and let them pursue those interests. Of course, you've got to do all the subjects you don't like for quite a while in school, but let them explore the subjects that they don't like. And then I think the question to ask children, rather than what is it that you want to be, I like to encourage teachers to talk to children and parents to talk to their children with, what problem do you want to solve? And I think if we ask them that question, suddenly you can be so creative with the solutions you come up with, but also the possibilities are endless of how you can solve them, whether you want to solve climate crisis, or whether you want to solve the fact that there aren't enough bikes or road bikes for Boris Johnson's scheme, or whatever it might be. I think that, you know, the electric scooter bikes or whatever it might be. A lot of girls love music. A lot of kids love fashion. And lots of people love art. Well, how can you, what is a problem around there that you think is the issue? You know, how can you resolve that? And then show them ways in schools, I think, and I think one of the most beautiful, or one of the most inspiring groups of people I met was they came out of Australia, and I think they're called the Creatables, if I'm not wrong, this company that does go into senior schools in Australia, and they find a problem that these girls want. Like, I want to be able to look at myself, you know, for my selfie ring light or something. So they make my pictures better. Well, okay, brilliant. So let's create our own ring lights. And they've made that part of the curriculum, as opposed to something that someone else does and you go and buy it off of Amazon, but something that you put your hand and heart and soul into creating yourself, and learning the electricity circuits that go into it, the technology that goes into keeping the ring light secured onto your phone. It was an incredible thing to watch. And the sense of pride that they had in the fact that they created this thing, and that doing that simple exercise then shows these children what is possible. It's not just a ring light, but wow, I can create a circuit to solve this and solve that and solve this and solve that. And I think that might be a great way to get girls interested in understanding how much reach these subjects might have for them.
Yeah. And do you think that would then sort of pan out into having them realize that from a longer term perspective, in terms of career choices, to see what's possible then by having these experiences in schools?
Yes, absolutely, I do. Yeah, I think this is the starting point, right? So you start to open their eyes to something that they are probably blind to. And it's not anyone's fault. I think it was just ignorance. None of us, I never thought you could be creative in technology. I never thought you could be a creative in maths. You know, I always thought you had to be, and I love maths, genuinely. And I'm a science teacher and a maths teacher because I absolutely love the subjects. You know, I also love arts. And I think it's really important to allow kids to feel that the things can coexist.
Yeah, most definitely. I agree with you there. And this is such an interesting topic, because I think what it's showing me is there's so much more that we can all be doing here to help and encourage children and you know, youngsters as they're coming through the education system to see what's possible. And to your point as well, we don't know what we don't know. So
yeah,
if you're not in an environment where you're either watching things on social media, or you have people around you, your parents or teachers, talking about it and knowing about these kind of careers that are out there, that, you know, that are possible.
Yeah, you know, and in going back to the whole education system, I think there are a couple of things. You know, we struggle to keep girls in further maths and by the time they get to A levels. So, but you got to trickle it down. You know, if we don't do this stuff and create this love for learning in the junior school, primary years, which is where I'm kind of specialized in, I think you're struggling. So getting female teachers in those subjects would be great. You know, if schools could have more females teaching these subjects, so they could see that, yes, if she can do it, I can do it. And really sharing that passion and letting it, because it's contagious. If you're enthusiastic, from what I've seen, genuinely, it's a lack of confidence. Once girls get that confidence that they can, their whole thing snowballs in terms of what their learning does. I think the other issue I've noticed with girls, because they might start off a little more precarious in certain subjects around maths and science, and so if the school is of a sort that they do setting in, because they aren't being extended like some of the other stronger mathematicians in their peer groups, as soon as they've been labeled as being in a lower set of a subject, they assume they're not good at it. So that is another barrier to keeping girls in those subjects. I think it's really important in junior school years or primary, you know, middle school years to really watch that, because you have no idea, just because you're 6 and 7 or 8 and 9 now, that you feel like your maths is a bit slower, or you haven't quite nailed those fractions, or you haven't quite nailed that idea around friction in science, that you're not going to get it when you're 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. You know, it really shouldn't. And I think what we do is we cap ourselves, or we say, well, I was in bottom sets, so I'm terrible at it. That's why I'm definitely not going to take it when I get older. You know, I can't wait to drop it. And I think that language, that narrative that we give ourselves, and that voice that speaks into our heads, and I think you can probably relate to it even as an adult. If you were put in a group where you've been told that maybe this isn't for you, you should come to this group, you know, but again, you know, making sure, and on the way I try to frame that for my own daughter is, if you're in the bottom set of something, sweetie, think about it as an opportunity. It means that you get so much extra time with the teacher to master a topic that you may not have had if you were in the class with way quicker kids. Like, take your time with it, really explore it, and make them feel almost like they've been put in a really lucky group, you know, as opposed to shaming them for it, which a lot of times that can happen too.
And I think you hit the nail on the head there in terms of turning it around and seeing it as an opportunity. What is the opportunity in any of this? You know, what is it? What does it mean for me? What is possible? What can I do? And you're right. You know, I can totally resonate even as an adult. You know, because we do it all the time. I have clients that I'm coaching who come to me with what I call stories, and those stories are their beliefs about they're a left brain or they're a right brain, or they're not good at you know, technical, or they're not good at creative, or they're not good at communicating, or, you know, the list goes on. And we put labels on ourselves. And I'm really aware of that, because I'll knock them down very quickly. It's like, because once you put your label on, oh, I'm not good at communication, right? Then you're not going to speak up, right? You're not going to ask questions. You're not going to go out and engage, because in your head, you're building this belief that you're not good at communication. And then what happens is you suppress yourself. It impacts how you're showing up in the world and how you're behaving. And then you're getting more evidence to show you that you're not good at communication, but because you're kind of, what's the word? It's not even self-sabotage, but you're kind of just limiting yourself by default. And I think this whole labeling of people is not helpful.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And that goes right back to then asking these questions like, what problem do you want to solve? Well, if you want to solve that problem, what are the steps that you need to get there? Okay, Mum, I'm not very good at my times tables, or I'm not really good at this. And great, how can we get better at it? What can we do? How can we use music and rhyme and rhythm, or, you know, can we get you some extra support to make sure you've mastered that? Because once you master this, the next step is going to be so much easier. And I think just breaking it down into bite-sized steps, because otherwise I think children find it overwhelming, the idea that they've got to do further maths. If they, you know, fail their fraction test now, they'll never be able to do it when they're older. And that stuff really, you know, is what I want to, and bring the fun back into it. You know, don't make these subjects look dry when they're not. There's, like you said, there's amazing stuff going on in it. And I know for me, you know, we had really boring screens and we didn't have whiteboards or interactive learning and things. So actually computer classes were quite dull. We weren't allowed to talk to anybody. We had to stay in our computers, you know, we had to sit in our seats. It was a dark room, and that was one of my, you know, least boring classes when I was growing up. But it's completely transformed. If you look at what the IT suites look like now and what kids can make from it, the robot work, the robotics that they do with that, it's absolutely fascinating and wonderful, and I think it should be celebrated and championed, and in a really fun, interactive, engaging, and keeping the enthusiasm levels up for it.
Yeah, wow. This is an amazing conversation, honestly. Tell me, how can we have or encourage girls to really think about the differences they can make, the impact that they can make in the world? What is it we can do to have them kind of open their eyes to that and think bigger?
Probably quite similar to the things I was saying. I think having them see what other women have done that have come before them, and what change we've already, the change that we've already seen. I think mentorship is really important, and I think having exposure and work experience opportunities, or a day, you know, I know going to the Science Museum is very exciting, but actually a day in maybe a fashion house, or food house, maybe a day at Uber Eats and Deliveroo, to see how all of this, because teenagers particularly love food, right? That's all they want. So if they can be privy to this and they can see the things that also, and I think it's really important to remember why they go into these subjects. Sometimes people say, I want to do science because I want to be as rich and famous as Elon Musk. And I think reminding ourselves about probably, I don't know how happy Elon Musk is, or, you know, are you doing it for the right reasons? Are you sure that these are, so making sure the role models are actually people that they can genuinely relate to. I think, you know, the Richard Bransons of the world, and listening to interviews about how he's done it, even with a learning difficulty in a neurodiverse brain, and what he's been able to achieve and break barriers to his entry in learning and his access to being able to solve problems. If you look at the way he works and his brain works, and, you know, and you can show children that, I think that's really important. I also think that if media companies and television program makers could make sure, if 50% of the population in the world that's watching their programs is female, that they include 50% of females as their main parts, and put those girls and female roles and write more female-based perspectives into these programs and movies. And yeah, I think that would be a really great start.
Yeah. So, Ramita, this has been a really insightful conversation, and I think there is so much for everyone to take away in terms of how much we can all contribute to, you know, encouraging girls to, you know, embrace what I think a lot of let's say me, younger or previous generations missed out on because we just didn't know. And there's so much in terms of technology that allows us to share more of that and make it visible for people to know what is possible. So I'd like to say thank you and ask you one last question. What would you like to leave the audience with?
Oh, I think if I can encourage anyone just to think creatively outside of their normal way to be, and just say, well, what can I do to learn something new that I didn't know before, with their growth mindset hat on, that would be fantastic. And I think if more employers could think about helping females who enter the world of STEM stay in STEM, that way we will create a lovely set of role models that aren't just the one or two or three or four, a handful of females that we look up to. Instead, it will be seen as the norm. You know, it would be lovely to have a world where females are part of the conversation.
Yeah, amazing. Ramita, thank you so much for joining me today in conversation. And
absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
I love your passion. I love your enthusiasm around this topic, and also the change and the impact that you're making in the world. But yeah, it really is amazing. So thank you.
Likewise, I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you so much, Leila. It's been lovely to be here.
You are welcome.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe to this podcast if you haven't already done so. And if you enjoyed and gained value from today's episode, then do please leave a review telling us your key learnings and what you enjoyed the most. And do please share this podcast with your friends and colleagues so we can spread the word on life leadership, creating a life of choice, freedom, and new possibilities. Connect with me directly on LinkedIn, and if you would like to learn more about how we can work together, either DM me on LinkedIn or email me. All details and resources can be found in the show notes.